Good morning, good morning, good morning. What a lovely day we have, right? First of all, let me introduce myself and my groupmates. Hi, this is Mariah Zane Blanco, and this is my lovely groupmates, Miss Kimberly Bertusha and Miss Yisil Bulacan. Today, we are going to share with you the steps of the ethical decision making. We do hope you can learn something out from it. There are 9 steps of ethical decision making process. But first, let me discuss to you the first 3 steps. Are you all ready? Let's go! The first one is gather the facts. Don't jump into conclusion without assessing the facts. Use when, where, what, how, and why when questioning. Assemble your facts and clarify your assumption. When you gather data, you should always know about the problem to be solved and the decision to be made. This is where you would know by yourself that you can give a successful decision. In questioning, you should always use what, when, where, how, and why. This is to make your questions formal. In assembling your information, these may lead to a concrete decision where you could state facts that will make your decision appealing and right to everyone. Second is define ethical issues. Identify the ethical issues before giving conclusions. State the ethical basis that you want to focus. And lastly, there are lots of ethical issues. Focus on one. What does ethical issues mean? Ethical issues occur when a given decision, scenario, or activity creates a conflict with society's moral principle. Both individuals and business can be involved in these conflicts, since any of their activities meant are put to question from an ethical standpoint. Third is identify the affected parties. Who are the primary and secondary stakeholders? Use perspective talking and sort why the stakeholders has issues that led to affect other parties. As a giver of decision, you should know who are the affected parties in these conflicts. By doing that, you will already know how to handle the situation and not to worsen it.
And the fourth step in ethical decision-making process is to identify the consequences, and these are the things we need to consider. First, positive and negative consequences. So, we need to think about potential positive and negative consequences for affected parties by the decision. And we also need to focus on primary stakeholders to simplify analysis until we become comfortable with the process. Next is magnitude and probability that the consequences will happen. So, why do we need to know this? Well, it is to address how likely the consequences is to occur. The short-term versus long-term consequences. So what does it mean? So when we say short-term, it is consequences that can be experienced directly, and while long-term consequences will stay for a long run, hunting for you and may destroy you. And then the last is the secrecy and symbolic consequences. So what is this two consequences? So when we say symbolic consequences, it can be described in terms of the message of a particular decision or action sends, while secrecy consequences is the feelings of anger, deception, and mistrust. And the fifth one is to identify the relevant principles, rights, and justice issues. So the obligations, cognitive barriers, and biases, appropriate decision or action. So obligations should be thought in terms of principles and rights involved. And we should know what obligations are created because of a particular ethical principles we might use in the situation. For example, the do no harm and the do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And for the right also, we should know what obligations are created because of the specific rights of the stakeholders. We should know what type of rights are involved, like it is negative or positive. And for the justice, we should also know the concept of justice that are relevant in the situation. Is it distributive or a procedural justice? And it is needed also to consider any relevant cognitive barriers and biases, and also to formulate the appropriate decision or action based solely on the analysis on these obligations. And the sixth step is to consider your character and integrity. So you need to consider these things: the specific virtue, the disclosure rule, and the cognitive barriers and biases. So it is important to consider integrity and character, for it supports virtue-based in decision making, and it is also relevant to the situation. And disclosure also is important, for it asks if you would be comfortable knowing about the action you propose to take. So in decision making process, it is really important to consider your character and integrity.
Number 7 is think creatively about potential action. So, if you have come up with solutions and try to brainstorm and come up with a solution that might satisfy the interest of the primary parties involved in the situations. So, be sure that you have not been unnecessarily forced into a corner. So, mura ni siya kanang sa like creative thinking. It is all about finding new ways of solving problems and approach situation. It is a useful skill for people from all walks of time and life. Sa creatively think about potential action is when faced in an ethical dilemma, put yourself in a creative thinking mode. Then stretch your imaginations to invent several options rather than thinking you only have two choices, to do or not to do something. Mauna siya ang sa think creatively about potential in actions. Okay, so number 8 is check your gut. So, even though the prior steps have argued for a highly rational process, it is always good to check your gut. So what do you mean by gut? So gut is courage or strength na siya. Sometimes we make decisions that we think long and hard, but often we make decisions simply because it feels right, no? So we call it intuition or instinct. So maka-question ta nga, when should we listen to our gut feelings and make decisions based on something nga dili na to ma-explain? So mauna nga we should check our gut, because your gut is smarter than you think and it can help you to make better decisions according to a psychologist. So mano siya ang sa gut. Ang sa check your gut. Last one is decide on your course of action and prepare response to those who may oppose your position. So you should decide and prepare, because there's almost or always somewhere na maka-oppose to whatever it is you're doing. Even if your goal is something everyone can agree on, na jud na yung mga dili mo disagree sa mga methods nga ma-achieve na. So, when your opposition starts fighting for efforts, it's best to be familiar with the tactics like they might use to do so and how your group might most achieve their respond, no? So, dapat jud ka nga magpasya sa yung mga paraan ng pagkilos at maghanda ng mga tugon sa mga maaaring umaayon sa iyong posisyon.